life, when you are definitely going to experience loss, don't lose your sense of humor. Our sense of humor is really valuable, especially when we're dealing with a burdensome time in our life and dealing with stress. And so we make it a point of providing a little bit of levity as we move along in these workshops. And I want to point out a couple of things at the very beginning here, and I'll do it with a little bit of levity. You may see on, like for instance, my notebook, this logo WW, or you might see on my shirt WW. I want to explain something. I do not work for Weight Watchers. This is not a Weight Watchers session, and it couldn't be anyway because I brought chocolates with me. I brought candy with me. I brought sugar with me. But Widowhood Workshop is the name of my family's passion project. Every member of my family is involved in this work. And the reason why it's called Widowhood Workshop is, let me explain to you about the purpose of this ministry. This ministry is all about raising awareness about loss and about the impact of loss, the kind of effect that it has on us. And that can be summarized in one word: grief. So what we try to do is we try to educate people about the powerful effect of loss, about the grief experience, and help people to become more educated to navigate the grief experience, and also to become more educated to help people effectively who are going through grief in their lives. I don't know if you've noticed this, but 1 out of 1 dies. Every time you turn around, people are dying on us. And that's always been that way. The tree of life is not planted on planet Earth. It's in heaven. Used to be here, but now it's in heaven. So we're in a situation where we're going to deal with loss. It's inevitable in our life. And what we need to learn to do is learn about it before we experience it. And if we've already experienced it, understand it better so that we can help other people. So that's what the Widowhood Workshop ministry is all about. It's about educating and it's about encouraging. Because I think people who have experienced loss, who come to these workshops, tell me that they are encouraged by what they hear and by the experience of coming to the workshop, because finding out more about grief and finding out a little bit more about what is very normal in the grief experience is very encouraging to people, because sometimes when we experience loss, it is so bad that what happens is we feel like we're going crazy and we begin to doubt ourselves and wonder about if we're normal or if we'll ever be normal again. And so loss has a really powerful effect, and that's why we want to spend time talking about it. And I really want to try to avoid talking to you. What I want to do is to talk with you. I want this to be a relaxed atmosphere. I want you to feel free to participate, and I'm going to even ask you and encourage you to participate. I don't want you to just sit there and feel like you have to consume what I say. I want you to feel free to contribute to our conversation. And there are things that you've experienced and you know about loss and about the powerful impact of loss that I do not know. I may know a few things that you don't know. I think we can help each other. You have also experienced some things in the way of loss that I have not. And I can learn from you. And there are also maybe some things in the way of loss that I've experienced that I can share to help you. I want us to look at this as a joint process where we're together helping one another to grow in regard to our knowledge about loss, about the impact of loss. And the reality is, just like H. Norman Wright said in one of the books he wrote, we live in a grief-illiterate society. In other words, people don't know much about grief. And he made this observation. He said, when we're living in that kind of a world, it's really hard to grieve effectively in a grief-illiterate society. So we need to learn more about grief for our own benefit and for the benefit of other people. And so that's how we're going to be proceeding both this evening and tomorrow. We'll spend some time talking together, and after we do that, we'll take a break, as Brother Richard has suggested, and then we'll hope that you don't escape, you don't leave. We just want you to stretch a little bit, and then we'll come back and we'll finish up, and we will finish up on the time just as we've designated on the flyers that were distributed about this workshop. So let's proceed from that point by realizing that what we're going to talk about tonight is life, love, and loss. Now, the place to begin to talk about that is the world that we live in. Whenever we're born into this world, we're born beautiful, we're born innocent, we're born totally dependent. Now, what kind of a world do we grow up in and live in? I want you to think about that. Now, what I want you to do, in a group this large, surely we could come up with at least 5 or maybe 6 different words or phrases that we could use to describe the world we live in. Can somebody get us started? Give me a word or a phrase that you'd use to describe the world we live in. What is it? Silent? Violent. I'm sorry, I didn't hear the V. And my ENT, my ear, nose, and throat doctor said I would probably never have to have hearing aids. I need to go back to him and get my money back on that visit. Violent. Yes, it is a violent world we live in. It's a changing world. It's a violent world. It's a changing world. What else? Sinful. Because it is sinful, it is a violent world. And it is at times, changing world to the point of chaotic. It sure is. How about unpredictable? Remember what James said in James chapter 4? He talked about you do not know what will happen tomorrow. Boy, that is so true. You know, how many times in your life already have you gotten up in the morning and you experienced something that day that you never dreamed that you would ever experience? Life is very unpredictable. Sometimes it's unpredictable because of us. Sometimes it's unpredictable because of other people that we interact with. But yeah, life is very unpredictable. Well, you've done a good job. Now, have you noticed something that all of those things have in common? Have you noticed there's a common thread with everything that we mentioned? Except maybe change. Did you notice they're negative, aren't they? Aren't they negative? They cause feelings and they're negative. Now, is life all negative? No, it's not. As a matter of fact, let me show you a picture. I'm going to show you a picture, and I'm going to ask you to look at this picture. And when you look at this picture, what does it communicate to you? You know, every time your eyes see something, it communicates something to your brain. Now, when you look at this picture up here, what does that picture tell you? What's it communicate to you? We have more what? Blessings than burdens. Okay, we have more blessings than burdens. Now, I'm going to read to you a passage in the Bible, and I'm going to ask you about this passage and about what you see on the screen. This is Job in the Old Testament. He went through a lot, didn't he? Now, at one point in the book, in chapter 14 and verse 1, here's what he says. Man who is born of woman is a few days and full of trouble. Now, I want to break that down for a minute. He started out by saying, man who is born of woman. Now, do you know of any other way to get born than born of woman? You know, I hope we don't have a politician here. You know, politicians are wondering about that issue, but, you know, we all understand that man is born of woman. And he says, man who is born of woman is a few days. Well, what about that? Do you believe that? Few days? Now, I see you shaking your head, but yet, do you know anybody who's 90 years old? Okay, what do we usually do when a person reaches 90? We throw a party. Why do we throw a party about 90? What if they were to get to 3 digits? What if they were to get to 100? They deserve a bigger party than they got when they're 90. And what kind of life is that? What word do we use to describe that life? It's a long life. Now, Job said, man who is born of woman is a few days. Now, how in the world could he say that? Is it a few days? Compared to what? Compared to eternity. The prophet Isaiah says God inhabits eternity. God is an eternal being. You know, we live kind of snapshot to snapshot. That's how we human beings live, snapshot to snapshot. Now, I want you to think about God and how different his perspective is. God sees a video, and there's something special about this video. It's always been running. It's running now, and it always has run and always will run. Eternity. How long is eternity? You know, you take 90 or 100 years and you lay it alongside eternity, and how big is 90 or 100 years? Just a drop in the bucket, isn't it? I was driving in Jackson, Tennessee one day, and it was about 2 years after my wife passed away. Now, during that period in my life, I fasted from music on the radio. I felt like I had to. I don't know how many of you have ever thought about this, but a lot of the music on the radio is romantic in nature, or it has romantic overtones. And I just couldn't handle that. I was in no condition to be exposed to that, so I did not listen to any music for 2 or 3 years after my wife passed away. So that's when I got hooked on what's called news talk radio. I was driving in Jackson, Tennessee, and I was listening to this news talk radio station. And there was this guy who evidently had bought time on that radio station, and he was preaching or teaching. I don't know what church he was from. I don't remember his name. But he made this observation, and I will never forget this. He said, wisdom is when you see something the way God sees it. Boy, as soon as I heard that, I thought, wow, that's a profound observation. You know, I always thought about wisdom as a person using their knowledge in a very practical way, in a fitting kind of a way. Wisdom is when you see something the way God sees it. Now think about how that is so true. When you see the church the way God sees the church, you have wisdom about the church. When you see marriage and family the way God sees marriage and family, you have wisdom about marriage and family. When you see human relationships the way God sees human relationships, you have wisdom about human relationships. When you see material possessions and money the way God sees material possessions and money, you have wisdom about those things. Anytime that we see something the way God sees it, we have wisdom. It would be a really good idea for us to see time as God sees it. Have wisdom about time. Eternity. Eternity. See, even though we may leave this world, there is an unseen world. We're going to be disembodied. We're going to be separated from our body. And there is an eternity after we die. And there's a heaven, and there's also a hell. So we are eternal beings, though we're just temporary in this tent, this body, this human body that we now live in. And it's just for a few days. It really is. We need to look at it that way. We're not here forever. We're just here for a few days. I think we would treat life a little differently if we have God's perspective about it. It's just a few days. How many is a few, though? You don't know. Could be later today is the end of our few days. Could be 6 years from now, or it could be on Sunday. When we treat time the way God wants us to treat time, understanding that it's just very limited here in this world, we would live a better life. Now here's Job. And he says, man that's born of woman is a few days. And then he makes this last remark. I'm going to read it right out of the Bible. Full of trouble. Now I have a footnote in my Bible that says that word trouble could also be translated turmoil. Full of trouble or turmoil. Now was he right about that? Now he was right about man that's born of woman. There's no other way to get born. He was also right about a few days. Was he right about full of trouble? Is life full of trouble? There are difficulties in life. Now, is that what that picture says on the screen? What does that picture communicate? What's the difference between that picture and what Job said? Does that picture say full of trouble? that screen says, that picture communicates to us, we have more blessings than we have burdens. That's not what Job said. Job said, full of trouble. Now, if something's full, what else can you put in it? If something is full, what else can you put in it? I brought in, oh, there it was. It was hiding behind the chair. This bottle of water, it says on the side of it is 16.9 fluid ounces. Now, it's not quite full. The water level right now is right here. Okay? Now, what if I were to take the top off of this and fill this bottle all the way up to the very brim? You remember when Jesus did that first miracle in Cana of Galilee? He had the water pots filled up how full? All the way to the brim. He wasn't tricking them. He was going to do a miracle. And that water level was filled all the way to the brim where it was full. Nothing else could be put in it. Well, let's think for a minute about this bottle. Let's assume I drink this bottle down to where there's about 8 ounces. And let's say the water level is about here. What would we say about that bottle then? Now, if it was filled all the way to the brim, it'd be full. If I went down about, halfway or so, what would we say about the bottle? Half what? Half empty or half full? Or have you ever thought about another option? Half empty, half full, but there's another option. I could also say it's full. What's it full of? Air and water, exactly. Your life is full. Full of blessings and burdens. There's never a time in your life when you're more burdened than you're blessed. Now, I'm not saying that's how you feel. I'm saying that's reality. We got to realize that there's a difference between feelings and reality. Our feelings are not always consistent with reality. Now, Job, what kind of man was Job? Okay, he was a righteous man. As a matter of fact, my favorite statement made about Job in the book of Job is made by God himself when God, in talking to Satan, said, "My servant Job." I just love that phrase. As a matter of fact, I'm thinking about having my kids put that on my grave marker. My servant Dean. Now, you see, he was not just one who had a good reputation, a righteous reputation. He was righteous in the sight of God. If you're righteous in the sight of God, if you're blameless and you avoid evil and sin because you hate it and because you love God and you're a worshiper of God, God knows that. And what we read in the book of Job is God's perspective. Now, he also had a good reputation, but he also had a good character, and God knew that he was a righteous man. Now, Job's not a liar. Job said, "Man who is born of woman is a few days and full of trouble." Why did he say full of trouble? From what he had previously experienced. That's the key. Have you ever thought about how much the experiences of our life have the way of tainting our perspective? Take, for instance, let's say there's a child born into this world. They have some sort of a birth defect. Or they're afflicted with something, and they die after 3 years. What word do we use to describe the length of their life? Okay, we don't talk about long life. We talk about short life, 3 years. Now, what if somebody were to be diagnosed with ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease, and they suffered, and I don't know if any of you are aware of the tremendous suffering that goes with that disease. It's an awful neurological disease. And they're diagnosed with that disease. And they struggle with that for 3 years and die. What word would we use to describe the length of their suffering? 3 years. That'd be a long, hard 3 years, wouldn't it? See how our perspective and our experience are related? A lot of times the things that we experience has a way of affecting how we look at things. So what had Job experienced that had caused him to go to the extreme of saying, full of trouble? Because he still had blessings. Now, let's count his blessings. Let me ask you this. Was he still alive? Do you consider life a blessing? One of the things you thank the Lord for, don't you thank the Lord for your life? You have life. He was alive. His heart was still beating. The blood was still coursing through his veins. He was alive. That's a blessing. Now, let me ask you about his situation. Was he married? His marital status. He was married. He wasn't suffering alone. He was suffering together with somebody else. Now, when I think of marriage, one of the key words I think about is the word together. Whenever you're married, you experience blessings together, and that magnifies the value and the joy of the blessed experience. When you suffer burdens, you share those burdens together with somebody else when you're married, and that helps you to cope with the struggle of dealing with those burdens. It is a wonderful thing. It is a great blessing to be married, to enjoy the blessings with somebody else, and to help you deal with the burdens in life. Do you know that there's some of us that don't have that blessing? Now, granted, she may not have been a 5-star wife. She was not a perfect wife. Nobody has a perfect spouse. There is no perfect husband. There is no perfect wife. Yeah, she struggled too. And by the way, I wonder if we're too hard on her, because what did she say to Job when she snapped? Curse God and what? Curse God and die. Now that's a pretty extreme statement. Now, have you noticed yourself in your own life or in your observation of other people, how that when people are going through a difficult time, when they're really struggling, when they're really burdened, they will sometimes say things they wouldn't otherwise say. And a lot of times they'll talk in extreme. Talk for instance, like a wife who is been frustrated with her husband because he's not been taking out the garbage. Now, that's not the unpardonable sin, okay? But, a wife can only take so much. So her husband is not taking out the trash anymore. It's like he has quit doing that. Well, after a few months, she just snaps at him and she says, "You never take out the trash anymore." And then he pulls out his phone and he says, "Now look, wait a minute. 2 weeks ago, I made a video of when I took out the trash. Right here it is. You said I never take out the trash." Why did she say never take out the trash? Because she was mad. She was angry. When we're really emotional, we will talk in extremes, and that often comes back to bite us. We all ought to be careful about using words like never, always. Words like that are universal type terms often come back to bite us. They're very seldom true. But when we're emotional, either very emotional in a good way or very emotional in a down kind of difficult way, we will say some things that are extreme. She snapped. Do you think Job, the kind of man he was, do you think he would marry a heathen woman? I seriously doubt it. The woman snapped. Why did she snap? What had she been through? What had she lost? Together, they had both lost a lot, hadn't they? 10 children? Have any of you ever lost a child? Have any of you here? That is such an abnormal, awful thing to experience. We're supposed to bury our parents, our grandparents. We're not supposed to be burying our children. That is abnormal. That is unnatural. That's just a terrible thing to experience. They didn't just lose a child. They didn't lose a couple. Do you know how many they lost? All of them. Do you know how many all of them was? 10. 7 sons and 3 daughters. Now, if you had lost 7 sons and 3 daughters, every single one of your children, would you be normal? Would you talk normal? Would you feel normal? Now, not only that, but she lost all her prosperity too, didn't she? You know, all those critters that they had. By the way, they were so smart the way they did this. You know, if you're going to have a bunch of critters, 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, 500 female donkeys. If you're going to have all those critters, it'd be good to have a big workforce. 7 sons and 3 daughters is a good start for a workforce. They were very smart, but they lost all that prosperity. She also watched him suffer. How many of you have ever been in the hospital and watched somebody suffer? And maybe even felt to the extreme, I wish that were me instead of them. You know, sometimes we can go to that point. We can just think, I wish it was me instead of them. She was watching her husband suffer tremendously. She had been through a lot, and she snapped. Now, I want to suggest to you that what happens here in chapter 14, verse 1, is Job permitted his burdens to blind him to his blessings. His burdens blinded him to his blessings. He wasn't thinking about his blessings. He was thinking about his burdens. He said, full of trouble. Man that is born of woman is a few days and full of trouble. Well, if it's full of trouble, then there aren't any blessings. Now, have you ever thought about the fact that he was alive, he was married? Do you know what some of us would give to have that blessing back? I don't have that blessing. I had it for 41 years, but I don't have it anymore. He also, besides being alive and having a wife, he had friends. Now, we're pretty quick to bring great shame on those friends. But I want to show you what great friends he had. This is chapter 2, Job chapter 2, verse 11. Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar, it says, they made an appointment together to come. Now, here's 3 friends that dropped everything in their life and they came to Job. They didn't send him an email or call him on the phone and say, hey, Job, why don't you come on over to our house? We've heard that you've fallen on hard times. How about you just get away for a while and come to our house? They didn't do that. They dropped everything in their life. Don't you figure they had a life? But they dropped everything in their life and they came to him. I don't know how long it was for them to get there, but that didn't matter. They heard that Job was suffering, and what a good friend does, whenever they hear somebody is suffering, they drop everything in their life and they go to that person. And that's exactly what those 3 friends did. Now, not only that, but I want you to notice, it says about their purpose. They came to mourn him and comfort him. They did not come to chew him out. They did not come to berate him and be critical of him. Now, they eventually ended up doing that, but that wasn't the reason they came. Do you know sometimes people, even us, with the best of intentions, can make really big mistakes in trying to deal with other people. They made some really bad mistakes. The biggest mistake they made was that they opened their mouth. The most important thing to do when people are hurting is to be with them. That's the most important thing. As a matter of fact, a lot of times the things that people remember we say are the things that we said that are hurtful and not helpful. If you are in the habit of Googling things on occasion, if you're a Googler, Google this. Dumb things caring people say. Can you imagine that? Dumb things caring people say. When sometimes we care. I mean, we really, sincerely, genuinely care. We will say dumb things. We say dumb things because we're ignorant. We're inexperienced. And so sometimes we make big mistakes in saying the wrong things. That's what those three friends did. But they did a lot of right things before they did anything wrong. Number one, they dropped everything and they came. Number two, they came with the right motive to mourn and comfort him. Now, notice also, chapter 2, verse 12 says in the book of Job, when they raised their eyes from afar, they did not recognize him. They lifted their voices and wept. They each tore his robe, sprinkled dust on his head toward heaven. They mourned with him. What does the Bible tell us that we need to do? Rejoice with those that rejoice. Weep with those that weep. They were spot on. They were doing exactly what good supporters do for other people. They went to them. They ministered to them by their presence. They wept with them and came with the right purpose because they wanted to be helpful. Now notice verse 13 says, so they sat down with him on the ground 7 days and 7 nights, and no one spoke a word to him. If those were 3 female friends, do you think 3 female friends could go 7 days and not say anything? No offense, women, I'm just joking, okay? Don't get mad. They sat there and ministered to him by their presence. That's great friendship. Whenever there are hurting people in our church family, when there are hurting people in our neighborhood, what we need to do is we need to go to them for the purpose of mourning and comforting them. Make it a point to minister to them by our presence and participate in their grief experience. Verse 13 says they sat down with him on the ground 7 days and 7 nights. Now, why did they do that? It says they saw that his grief was great. You know what great grief needs? Great grief needs support. If we want to be effective supporters of other people, then we need to go to them. Let me tell you about something that you should never say. From this day forward, don't ever say this. I can't go there because it's out of my comfort zone. Don't ever say that. The cross of Jesus Christ is not about comfort. It's about crucifixion. Christianity is about sacrifice, about service and sacrifice. You know what we are? If we let protecting our comfort zone become more important than doing God's will, do you know what we've become? We've become idolaters. Because our comfort zone has become more important than God and his will in our life in regard to helping other people. See, being an idolater is more than having some physical object and bowing down to worship it. When we permit anything to get between us and us doing God's will, then we have become idolaters. Whatever it is that stopped us from being with those people, that's become our idol. Our comfort zone is not intended to be our idol. Some of our best ministry that we do in our life is when we get out of our comfort zone. We put ourselves in situations where we are maybe even in pain, uneasy, way more than uncomfortable, and humbled because we don't have a clue about what to do. But going and being with those people, despite all of that, that's love. These 3 friends loved Job. He had friends in his life who genuinely cared about him. Is that a blessing? Now, the biggest blessing he had was the one in heaven. Who did he still have in his life? He still had God. Now, I want to show you a verse where it's obvious that Job snapped. Now, there's more than one time in the book of Job where we could point out that he snapped. But let me read to you something. This is in chapter 7, verse 6. My days are swifter than a weaver's shuttle. Now, you probably, if you've been in a memorial service, you've heard a preacher quote that verse. My days are swifter than a weaver's shuttle. Now, watch what he said at the end of that verse. And are spent without hope. What do you think God felt when he heard Job say his life was spent without hope? In Romans 15:13, we're told God is a God of hope. If you have God, what else do you have? You have hope. Can you imagine a person who is devoted to God? Now, I'm not talking about the reputation. I'm talking about genuinely devoted to God. Somebody who loves God. Experiencing something that was so impactful in their life that they weren't thinking straight. They weren't thinking normally. They got to the point where they thought that their life was hopeless. He had God. His life was not hopeless. Man, he was still alive. He had a wife. He had 3 great friends. He had God. And yet he's saying his life is spent without hope. He was not without hope. But we can have experiences in our life that can have such a dramatic impact on us, we think that our life is hopeless. When we're children of God, our life is never hopeless. Never. And I do not use that word very often. Never. There is a never set of circumstances. Never is there a set of circumstances where a Christian is without hope. Now, that doesn't mean we might not feel without hope, but remember, your feelings are not always consistent with reality. Job struggled too. The point that I'm trying to make is, sometimes when we're going through a really bad time in our life, when we're really struggling with things, we cannot see things clearly. It messes up our vision. And sometimes we're just not ourselves. We say and do, act and react in ways that are just not normal for us, to the point that we may even wonder about ourselves. 3 weeks after my wife passed away, this was the middle of January of 2014, I was in our house all by myself. Now, I'm not a talk-to-yourself kind of person. Now, some of you kind of look like you might be, but not me. I'm not a talk-to-yourself kind of person. So I'm sitting there, Northeast Ohio, cold, wintry January night, middle of January 2014, and something just comes out of my mouth. And I said this out loud. Now, why I said it out loud, I have no idea. But here's what I said. What's wrong with me? What's wrong with me? I was a mess. I was really struggling. I was having thoughts and feelings I'd never had before, and I wasn't thinking straight, and I wasn't feeling normal. Well, I just lost my wife, 3 weeks previous to that. I just cared for her for 8.5 years during her decline because of her Parkinson's disease. Yeah, I was a mess. I was not normal. Could you be normal after going through such a tremendous loss like that? When we experience difficult things in our life, we just can't expect ourselves to be normal. We can't expect ourselves to think normal. We can't expect ourselves to feel normal. And it really is important for us to, ahead of time, when we're more calm, come to understand more about what it's like being a human in a broken world. We're humans in a broken world, and everybody has a thinker and a feeler. And our thinker and our feeler are not always on the same page. Even when we sometimes get our thinker straight, we can't get our thinker and our feeler together. Because sometimes our feeler and our thinker are on different pages. For instance, if somebody had come to Job, if one of those 3 friends had come to Job and said, Job, do you still believe there's a God? What do you think Job would have said? Well, sure. As a matter of fact, he had problems with God. He talks a lot about that. By the way, in the book of Job, we have a tendency to read the first 2 chapters, and then we go to chapter 42. There's a whole bunch of good stuff, chapter 3 through chapter 41, that reveals to you about how difficult we human beings can struggle when we're going through a difficult time in our life. His 3 friends were struggling. He was struggling. His wife was struggling. The point I'm trying to make is, when you go through a hard time, cut yourself some slack, because you can't be normal. And thank God that He is a long-suffering, patient God who knows our frame. And He knows what a mess sometimes we can be when we go through a really difficult time. Now, what I love is that sometimes what we do when we get together and we come together for worship, we'll remind ourselves to do something that's really important. count your blessings. Now, having talked about this a little bit, and I want to remind you again, there's never a time when you're more burdened than you're blessed. Never. We are always more blessed than we're burdened. Now, we may not feel that way, but it's still a fact. Just because our feeler doesn't agree with a fact doesn't mean the fact is false. What we need to keep in mind is that we're blessed. We are richly, richly blessed. And we always have more blessings than burdens. We'll talk more about that, especially Sunday, when we study Psalm 31 and we talk about what we ought to do when we're overwhelmed. But there are so many blessings that we have in our life. And from this day forward, I want to ask you, when you sing that song together with your church family, Count Your Many Blessings, I want you to think more carefully about the words. I'm going to ask you to sing this song, all of us together. The way we're going to do it is there are 4 verses. We're not going to sing the chorus, but just once at the end. We're going to sing all 4 verses and then the chorus. When we do that, don't get caught up in the melody. See, sometimes we sing songs so often that we really don't concentrate on the lyrics because we're so familiar with the melody. I want you to watch the lyrics of this song now as we sing it and we go through it. When upon life's billows you are tempest tossed, when you are discouraged thinking all is lost, count your many blessings, name them one by one, and it will surprise you what the Lord hath done. Are you ever burdened with a load of care? Does the cross seem heavy you are called to bear? Count your many blessings, every doubt will fly, and you will be singing as the days go by. When you look at others with their lands and gold, think that Christ has promised you his wealth untold. Count your many blessings, money cannot buy your reward in heaven nor your home on high. So amid the conflict, whether great or small, courage, God is over all. Count your many blessings, angels will attend. Help and comfort give you to your journeys in. Count your blessings, name them one by one. Count your blessings, see what God hath done. Count your blessings, name them one by one. Count your many blessings, see what God hath done. Now there's a problem with our blessings. We become very attached to our blessings. We love them. I use the word love in the sense that a lot of times we use it. I love the state of Ohio, for instance. I was born in Ohio. I lived most of my life in Ohio. I love Ohio. I also love pizza, almost any pizza. I've never met a pizza I didn't like. I love, we love things. We're very attached to them. In other words, we place a high value on them. We care about them. Now, sometimes we become attached to things unintentionally. Now, do you think this boy had any intention of getting his tongue stuck to that pole? By the way, does anybody remember the name of the movie? Christmas Story. Okay, does anybody remember the name of the boy whose tongue is stuck to the pole? Don't be looking on your phone. Who's the other boy that wanted the Red Ryder BB gun? That's Ralphie. He's the easy one. Okay, Flick is the boy. Flick is the boy who has his tongue stuck to the pole. Now, I have a gift for anybody who knows the other country besides the United States where this film was made. I did not know until recently that actually this film was filmed in 2 different countries. Obviously, one of them was Cleveland, Ohio. Okay? Does anybody know the other country? What? Say that again. Come over here. He said Canada. Now, if you don't know this yet, Dean Miller loves Buc-ee's. Okay, now, one of the things that I do when I do a workshop is I reward people who have useless knowledge. He has proven he has useless knowledge. He knew he knew Canada. Yeah, some of the scenes were actually filmed in Canada. I'm going to give you a priceless gift. Buc-ee has beaver buddies. You can go into a Buc-ee's, and hopefully you're going to get one in Dayton here in a couple of years. Right. You can go in there and you can get beaver buddies in a box. I'm going to give you these beaver buddies as a gift to reward you for your useless knowledge.
Well, thank you for not asking me which city in Canada.
Yeah, yeah, because I don't know either. Yeah, but we become attached to things. Now, let me ask you, what is the word we use for a four-legged critter whenever we get it and we bring it into our house for the first time? It's a pet. It's a pet, right? What does it become over time? A P-E-S-T. Good answer, a pest, okay? What does it become besides a pest? It becomes a part of the family, one of your children, right? You even talk to it. Do you have a dog or a cat you talk to? Or maybe a fish or whatever? Okay. It becomes something that's of value to you, right? And because of that, what if you were to lose that pet? I remember when I lost my favorite dog. Her name was Sissy. She was a boxer. Oh, man, when she died, that was heartbreaking. I helped dig the grave where we buried her. Do you remember the first episode of the long-running series that had, who was the guy who did the Jell-O commercials? Bill Cosby. Does anybody, the first episode of the Bill Cosby show, a fish had died. And they had a memorial service over the toilet before they flushed the fish down the toilet. That fish had become important to them. See, we become attached to things. Now, do you know there are pet cemeteries? I was in Goshen, Indiana, doing a workshop there, and they said, hey, right down the street. I said, you're kidding me. I went down there and I took a picture. I have a picture in my phone of the sign about the Goshen, Indiana Pet Cemetery. I was in Wiley, Texas, just north of Dallas. I saw this amazing cemetery, and it looked so beautiful. I thought, man, rich people must be buried there. No, that's a pet cemetery, I found out. We can become so attached to our pets that when we lose them, it can shake you up. Now, I want to ask you this question. Name me something that if we lost it, it would shake us up. Name me something. Don't think about people now. Name me something that if we lost it, it would shake us up. Credit card, okay. Preaching Bible. House. Hey, what is the big deal about a house? Because I have this woman that lives, she goes with me everywhere I go. I call her Miss Google. She lives in my phone. She's real skinny and she's not very tall. But because of her, if you tell me about your if you tell me about your address, I can go to Zillow and I can see the overpriced value they place on your home. It's always overpriced, but I can see. What is the big deal about losing your home? Because you can find another place to live. It's just wood and brick and glass. What's the big deal about a home? Memories. Why are the memories a big deal? Let me give you 3 words that define life. This is what life is. Life in 3 words. People, relationships, and experiences. That's what life is. People, relationships, and experiences. That's why that house is so valuable. Far exceeding the monetary price tag. for that house is the sentimental value that you place on it because of your heart. Jesus said in Matthew 6:21, where your heart is, or where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. Your heart follows your treasure. That house became something your heart was very attached to, and you placed a great value on that. So you lose your house. By the way, if you lose your house, what's irreplaceable? What is one thing that helps us to remember? Pictures. Now, what is a picture? I'm talking about a hard copy picture. A hard copy picture is a piece of paper. That's all it is. It's a piece of paper. Physically, that's all. It's a piece of paper. Now, what's on that paper that makes that paper of value? The image. What are the images of? People, relationships, and experiences. Those pictures are valuable because of people, relationships, and experiences. Within us, we assess value to things. Our house, other people in our lives, pet. Now, when we lose things of value, see, the bummer with blessings is you don't get to keep your blessings as long as you'd like. We're always losing our blessings before we want to. How about your youth? You lose it, don't you? Thankfully, gradually, and hopefully we adjust along the way. Now, I want to ask you to think about a few things. How about a young lady who's on the campus of the University of Dayton? And one night, in a terribly violent experience, she's raped. She's lost her virginity in that violent experience. Do you think she's going to grieve? Now, how about a young lady who grew up in the church who genuinely loves the Lord? I mean, sincerely, genuinely loves the Lord. But in a moment of passion with a boyfriend, she gifts her virginity to her boyfriend. Do you think she's going to grieve that? She's broken the heart of God. See, that's the problem with sin. Sin is not just breaking the law of God, it's breaking the heart of God. A God who loves us more than anybody else loves us. She's going to grieve because of that sin in her life. And when we sin, we should grieve. Have you ever stopped to think about people who go through divorce? You know, when people stand up there and they say, I do, the intention is not to get a divorce. The intention, the plan is to stay married until death. But sometimes people change. It takes two to get married. It only takes one to blow it up, though. There are a lot of people who've experienced divorce that did not want the divorce. Sometimes people change their mind and they decide to blow it up. There's grief that goes with divorce because they've lost the blessing of marriage. How about a person who comes back from the military service and they come back with one less arm? Or maybe they've lost both legs. What about the loss of a physical part of your body? You're going to grieve that, aren't you? What about if you have cancer? What have you lost if you've been diagnosed with cancer? You've lost your health. Do you remember me telling you about being in Jackson, Tennessee, and hearing that guy say, when you see something the way God sees it, you have wisdom? I was going to an appointment with my nurse practitioner who was a member of the church. And I decided this one day when I was there for a visit that when he walked in the room where I wasn't going to greet him like normally we would greet ourselves. As soon as he walked in the door, I said, hey, Brent, when do people appreciate their health? What do you think he said? When they lose it. Isn't that a shame that we're that way? Sometimes we don't appreciate something until we lose it. We shouldn't be that way. But a lot of times what happens is we experience different kinds of losses in this life, and we don't realize that we're going to be in this period of grief for a while. It may be for a long time, depending on how much value we placed on whatever it is that we lost. And that grief is really going to mess us up. Tomorrow morning in the first session, what we're going to talk about is what grief does to us. I mean, grief really does a number on us. Whenever we've experienced the loss of something that was of value to us, it really does shake us up. And we are not going to be our normal self. We have to realize that for our benefit, and we also need to realize that when it comes to other people. We can't expect other people to be their normal selves when they have experienced loss in their life. We need to be patient with them. We need to be patient with ourselves. Because loss is a hard thing to have to deal with in our life. Okay, now, we're going to take a break for 5 minutes, and we are going to finish up right at 7:30. It'll only be a 25-minute session, but I want to show you something that will help you to navigate the losses in your life and maybe even help you understand better about your past whenever you've struggled with something that you've lost in your life. But before we do that, I want to take a 5-minute break. Let's get up and stretch a little bit. If you want to go out and take a look at those tables for a couple of minutes, feel free to do that.